Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving headfirst into the grim reality of Eren's choices in the canonical ending of Attack on Titan. Now, this is a story that has always pushed the absolute boundaries of morality, freedom, and the devastating cost of survival. But today, we're going to look at the source material through a completely different lens. We're going to examine the ending Hajime Isayama gave us, strip away all the grand orchestration, and look at the raw, underlying mechanics of the narrative. Then, using the very rules established in the lore, we're going to construct an alternative path that challenges literally everything we thought we knew about our protagonist.
But before we just accept the story as totally finished, let's stop and ask a pretty profound question to shift our perspective. Eren Jaeger burned 80% of the world to give his friends a future, but could he have given them a present? In the timeline we got, Eren sacrificed humanity to buy time for his loved ones. But what if the ultimate sacrifice wasn't burning the world down, but fundamentally altering reality so his friends could live in the here and now completely unburdened? Keep that question in the back of your mind as we map out this narrative architecture.
Let's start by looking at Section 1, the original reality, a world left in ashes. 80%. Just take a second to wrap your head around the absolute scale of that destruction. By bypassing the royal blood restriction and weaponizing the unhardened walls, Eren completely flattened every major civilization and absolutely crushed every defending fleet outside Paradis Island. This horrific extermination of 80% of all human life on Earth is the staggering, undeniable cost of the canonical timeline. To put that into perspective, that's like wiping out everyone on Earth today except the populations of India and China simply because reality didn't live up to your expectations. When we dig into his final conversation with Armin in the Paths, the source material lays bare a pretty terrifying truth. This wasn't just some calculated geopolitical strategy. This annihilation was ultimately fueled by a much darker, fundamentally selfish truth, childish grief and pure disappointment. The real outside world just didn't match the boundless, empty frontier of freedom described in Armin's childhood book. It was literally the manifestation of a broken boy annihilating a reality that failed to match his dream.
Let's walk through how this timeline actually plays out. On day 1, the rumbling annihilates 80% of life. Then on day X, Mikasa severs Eren's head, an agonizing act that somehow convinces Ymir to let go of her lingering attachment to King Fritz, which finally breaks the Titan curse. But look at the final point on our timeline here. Centuries later, despite his friends ending the curse, the post-credits reality reveals that the cycle of human hatred just continued completely unimpeded. Paradis is eventually carpet-bombed into absolute rubble by modern stealth aircraft. The 80% died for nothing permanent. Eren basically just purchased a temporary window of peace at the unimaginable cost of billions of souls.
And this brings us to Section 2, a philosophical failure, or what we can call the trapped narrative.
Isama's narrative brilliance absolutely shines when depicting violence as an inherited, generational disease. The story tracks this psychological decay with surgical care. But the source text strongly suggests that the original ending kind of stumbles because it never actually tests an alternative treatment. As an audience, we were trapped in this philosophical false binary. On one hand, you have Eren's global genocide, the total annihilation of the outside world. And on the other, you have Zeke's euthanasia plan, which isn't really a true alternative, but more of a slow-motion flavor of surrender. The ending feels emotionally bankrupt because Eren never genuinely wrestles with a choice that demands restraint. He just defaults right back to his base instinct of destruction. But what if there was a third option?
Let's explore that in Section 3, the alternative path, a totally different choice in the paths.
Let's establish a totally new premise based directly on the mechanics provided by the source. Inside the timeless expanse of the Paths, with Ymir freed and the full, godlike power of the founding Titan in his hands, what if Eren looked at the rumbling and chose the one thing he had literally never once chosen in his entire life? Restraint. The foundation of this alternative is a refusal to march. Picture this scenario. Eren stands before the founder Ymir. Her chains have fallen. The colossal titans stand ready. But Eren looks at Ymir not as a slave to be weaponized, but as a mirror of his own inability to let go. He acknowledges that she served Fritz because she couldn't sever her bond, exactly like how he was running toward destruction because he couldn't let go of his horizon. So instead of commanding her to march, he asks her to simply stop. He asks her to help him build a tomb rather than a war machine.
This builds into a precise, actionable plan. Step 1. He uses the absolute authority of the founding Titan to permanently seal the colossal titans into the bedrock, using structural crystallization to turn them into inert stone. Step 2, he orchestrates a massive illusion using controlled emissions of steam and localized tectonic shifts to make it look exactly like a volcanic apocalypse. Step 3, he just vanishes from the global stage. Think about it from the perspective of the Marleyan commanders across the ocean. They're looking at their war tables, and Paradise hasn't attacked. It has seemingly just consumed itself in ash and fire. The Eldian threat is simply gone.
But of course, there's a catch, which we'll cover in Section 4, the price of peace, and the inward violence required to maintain it.
Every single choice in this universe demands a toll. Having vanished the island from the world map, Eren has to make absolutely sure his own people never seek out the outside world, nor provoke it ever again. To pull this off, he commits a terrifying act of inward violence by invoking the memory alteration capabilities of the Founding Titan on every single Eldian within the walls. He literally takes it all, granting his friends these peaceful, totally untraumatized lives. Mikasa wakes up and has no memory of the name Eren Jaeger. Armin retains his natural curiosity but entirely forgets the ocean and that book that sparked his wanderlust in the first place. Historia gets to rule a peaceful country with zero memory of the tragedy that gave her the crown. Sasha, Jean, and Connie live full lives, completely forgetting the trauma of the Scout Regiment. They don't hate the world, simply because they no longer know there is a world out there to hate.
This transforms our protagonist, as we'll see in Section 5, the immortal warden, trapped in a cage of his own making.
To anchor this massive permanent memory suppression, Eren can't just walk around on the surface with his friends. He refuses to return. Instead, he chooses to seal his physical body in a stark, unadorned stone chamber miles beneath the foundations of Wall Sina. He holds no throne, wears no crown, and just sits in the dark forever, maintaining this microscopic link to the Titan power to keep the island's memories locked away securely. And you know, this transforms Eren into the ultimate dictator. It's the absolute bitter, devastating irony of his character arc. Eren spent his entire life violently raging against his father and the royal family for stripping away the choices of the people within the walls without their consent. Yet here, in this alternative, the boy who raged against stolen choices becomes the supreme dictator of reality. He completely strips his loved ones of their consent, deciding exactly what they're allowed to remember, feel, and know. He literally becomes the very cage he swore to destroy.
Imagine this. Centuries later, the Titan power finally fades natively. A child playing in the ruins of a long-forgotten subterranean tomb stumbles right into Eren's empty stone room. The immortal warden is nothing but dust, but the walls are covered, floor to ceiling, in the names of everyone whose memories he stole. And down at the bottom, etched right at a child's eye level, is this chilling single sentence: "I chose the cage so you would never know you were in one." The child just shrugs, totally not understanding, and runs back up into the sunlight.
And that brings us to Section 6, our final verdict, and a seriously devastating ethical question.
As we wrap up this explainer, it's absolutely vital that we impartially weigh the moral benefits against the horrific implications of a silent god who steals humanity's free will, becoming an absolute tyrant of the mind. We are left looking at two horrific legacies: the monster, utilizing extreme physical violence to preserve freedom, even if it ultimately fails centuries later, versus the warden, entirely removing human autonomy for unpoisoned safety. On one hand, the slaughter of 80% of humanity is averted, and Paradise achieves a quiet peace completely unpoisoned by global warfare, but on the other hand, it perfectly illustrates that a love that systematically steals your choices might actually be the most insidious cage of all.
So it all comes down to this ultimate question: which Eren do you choose? Do you go with the monster who burned the world to ashes so his friends could be free, permanently cementing his legacy as history's greatest villain? Or do you choose the warden, who locked the world away so his friends could be safe, completely erasing their free will, only to be remembered by absolutely no one? I really want to know where you stand on this philosophical divide, so definitely drop your thoughts in the comments. Because the story and the massive questions it asks were never really finished. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.